Can you hear me? I've got that it's 9 o'clock, time to begin. If you would, bear with me and let's open with a word of prayer, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning, the opportunity to gather here with our brethren and to open up your word and to study from it. We ask, Lord, that you forgive us of our sins, that you will be with us in this period of study, that we will grow in knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, and be better able to apply these things to our lives and to share them with others. We pray that everything we do here this morning is in accordance with your will. We're thankful for your mercy and your Son, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. So I guess I need to, give my appreciation to the elders for giving me this opportunity, but also to people like Jack Davis and Joe Taylor who kept pushing pretty often for me to try to do something like this. And I was given the opportunity to teach a class, and I had a few options. Ecclesiastes was one of them, and I jumped on it. I do like this book. I think I started reading it on my own. Of course, I had a few classes when I was younger, but in high school, just started reading it on my own. And something about the theme of this book really appealed to me at the time. I think in large part because this is kind of a depressing book. Your teenage years is kind of odd, Sometimes those things like resonate with you, and they still do. But I'll say it appears depressing. And it has a reason for that and reaches the end. And we'll get to that in this class, I hope. I do like what Jack Davis did. I borrowed from him, as long as you can. I don't know how clear that is to you. It's my phone number and email. If you can't see it, I'm sorry. You just can't get a hold of me. But if you can read it, have any questions, comments, anything you want to send to me afterward, Facebook Messenger, text, email, hit me up. Be interested to hear what you have to say. Any questions, again, shoot that to me. Or complaints or suggestions. I'm open to anything. I want to go ahead and get started here with the first 3 verses. We're just going to dive right in, at least right now. And so the book opens up with the words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man to all his labor which he hath taken under the sun? And a few things I want to look here, and we're going to use this to kind of explain how we're going to view the whole book going forward. Okay, so we're going to start off here with a few Greek words. Bear with me, we're going to address this. All right, so preacher is Hebrew for koheleth. You see a few different spellings of it. In the Greek, it's Ecclesiastes. So that's where we get the name of the book. It means the preacher. I mention the Hebrew because you have a few places, if you read up and kind of study this, or what does this passage mean, or whatever, some places refer to koheleth almost as like the name of the writer. It just means preacher. All right. Vanity, the Hebrew word for that is hebel. I can't speak Hebrew. I don't know how to pronounce it. But it means vapor. And this is interesting. And again, I'm going to talk about Greek and translations and how much we're going to dive into that in just a moment. But this word vapor, breath, we have the word vanity, right? And I think I have the definition up there as well. So in the English, the word for vanity is like lack of real value, hollowness, worthlessness, trivial, pointless. And I think that kind of makes sense here. But the real Hebrew word is like vapor, and I think you can kind of understand that. So many things in life, they're like a vapor. They're hard to grab onto. You can't trust them. They're not really tangible, and they're brief. They're fleeting, right? And that's what Solomon is saying here. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Everything's like vapor. It's just, it's here for a moment and it's gone. You can't fully grasp it. You can't hold on to it. And under the sun is a phrase that it's just going to come up nearly 30 times throughout the book, so we may as well draw attention to it. Now, what does that mean? And sometimes you'll see a derivative of that, under heaven. They kind of use the same thing. It just means life on earth, life in this physical world, all right? And that's kind of what we're going to be getting at. But now I kind of want to take one step back and take a bigger view, kind of establish the book here. So Traditionally, this was viewed as written by Solomon. If you jump down to the bottom bullet point, some scholars argue about the authorship. Was it Solomon? Was it someone later? And there are some textual clues for people to argue over it. And I'm going to say I'm not really worried about arguing it. For the purposes of this class, we're going to say Solomon, and there are reasons for that as well. But I do just want you to know, and let me take one more step back and explain why I have some of this on here. Because some people are like, who cares? Why are we worrying about this or that? Well, there's a lot of things we can get out of the Bible. A lot of things we need to get out of the Bible. I think that, let's say, most people in here are adults, right? So you've at least aware of some children who grow up in the church. They go off to school for the first time. You feel like, well, we've established their faith. They're good and faithful. They go off to school, and all of a sudden, oh man, their faith just completely vanishes. It just falls away. And then, well, how does that happen? We told them that history and archaeology only support the Bible, that science only supports the Bible, and they go away and hear one science professor, and all of a sudden, oh man, evolution, the Bible's all false, and they fall away from it. And so I bring this up because sometimes you can teach someone in such a way as to hide them from what the naysayers say, what other people say. And you say, well, it's only this way, and there's nothing supporting that, nothing supporting this alternate view, and they go out and they see something that is an alternate view that looks like it has support, and all of a sudden, man, I've been deceived. That's how they feel often and fall away. So I'm pointing this out that some people, in a like manner, I'm pointing out that some scholars will have textual clues in Ecclesiastes and I don't think Solomon wrote that. I think someone wrote it in his name or in the spirit of. And so I'm just letting you know that if you see it, not to oh man, everything I've been told to lie or freak out or whatever. Just scholars have different opinions on stuff. These are very old texts. The Jews traditionally, as I understand it, view this as being written by Solomon, and there's textual clues inside Ecclesiastes that would bear that out as well. In this class, we're going to move forward as if Solomon wrote it. And that's if anyone has a different opinion on that, it does not bother me, but that's just how I'm going to choose to head off on this class. Solomon also authored Proverbs and Song of Solomon. There's at least 3 places in Proverbs that I'm aware of that says Solomon wrote them. Which is interesting. So Proverbs 1:1 is the place you can go. He wrote Proverbs. And I'm not aware of any dispute to that. He reigned for 40 years. We know that from 2 Chronicles 9 verse 30, 1 Kings 11:42. But we don't know at what age he began to reign. We don't know what age he was when he died. We don't know what age he was when he had his son Rehoboam. We just know that he reigned for 40 years. However, we do know how old Rehoboam was when he began to reign. I think 1 Kings 14 verse 21 says that Rehoboam was 41 years old when he started to reign. So when Solomon started to reign, so if Rehoboam was 41 when he began to reign, and Solomon reigned for 40 years, Rehoboam was 1 year old when Solomon began to reign. So Solomon had at least one child when he started his reign. He was a young man, or young, and we do know that, and we'll probably touch on that in a minute too. Go back there when Solomon began to reign. He viewed himself as a child. But again, we'll touch on that in a moment. Reigned during the height of Israel's golden age. So let's remember here, there's different periods of the Bible we can talk about, and this one takes place during the United Kingdom, and really Solomon, is the end of that time period. Then we go into the divided kingdom where Israel and Judah are separated, right? But during the time of Solomon, this was like the wealthiest, the most gold, silver, all that jazz that Israel had ever seen. And the scriptures tell us that, silver was almost like rocks. It was so abundant during that time. He built the temple. As we know, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, which turned his heart away from the Lord. And this will probably be referenced again later. We'll probably come back to that as we go through Ecclesiastes, because I think it becomes kind of pertinent. He literally had God-given wisdom. Was it James 1? James 1:5 says that any of us lack wisdom, let him ask of God that gives to all men liberally, upbraideth not. Anyways, if you want wisdom, you ask of God, he will give it to you. Solomon, I think, had it in a degree above that, actually. And actually, I want to go ahead and just look at that briefly if we can. Let's turn back to 1 Kings chapter 3 real quick. I think everybody's probably aware of this, but I personally think it's good to practice turning through our Bibles. I want to read this. 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning in verse 5. In Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give thee." And Solomon said, "Have you shown unto the Lord, unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee, and thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on the throne as it is this day. And now, my Lord, my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David, my father, but I am but a little child, and I know not how to go in or to come out." Now, that was verse 7 of 1 Kings 3. Solomon says he's but a little child. I think it just means he's young. He doesn't know what's going on. Now, Josiah was 8 years old when he started to reign. I think Solomon was older than that, but that's a guess. Again, we don't know. He was young. I think, and this is a tangent, sorry. I think Josephus said that Solomon reigned for 80 years and died at age 94. Well, that's not right. Solomon reigned for 40 years, and I don't think he was 94. I think he was young, probably in his 20s, maybe late teens when he began to reign. But so anyways, that tangent. Verse 8, 1 Kings 3. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people, and cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this great people? And of course, as we know, that request pleased the Lord, that he asked for. He could have asked for anything. He could have asked for wealth, for greatness, for more land, whatever. But he asked for wisdom in ruling God's people. And you jump down a few verses. Verse 12, God says, "Not only have I given you wisdom, I've given you all this other stuff you could have asked for too." So he was very wise. All right, and so that's more or less Solomon. Like I say, we may touch a little bit more on him as we go through the book. I just throw this in there for extra because I've always liked this passage. As King David is dying, he looks at his son Solomon, and I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man. And he goes on some more and admonishes Solomon to follow the paths of God, and God will take care of him and so forth. But I've always liked that verse, so I'm just sharing it with you. All right. Is this too small for anyone to read?
Yes.
Okay, I'll fix that next time. I'm sorry. First time I'm having it up here on the big screen. So I'll fix that for the classes going forward, make sure the font's bigger. First, I want to make this point. I think the Bible is its own best commentary. We're gonna look at different passages throughout the Bible. I think that's the first place you go when you're trying to understand the Bible is the Bible, and so I'll say that first. And of course, you got 2 Timothy 2:15, right? Study to show thyself approved before God. We need to study. We need to know. And then after that, I think my slide says anything with caution, and then references the Bereans, where they were studying. They were noble because they studied their scripture to make sure anything that was being taught was true, and that's what we need to be doing as well. So if you read another commentary, that's fine. Be cautious. God didn't write it; some dude did. All right? And that goes with me too, right? And I'm not a scholar, so especially with me, Some of these scholars write stuff, some of them know what they're talking about. I can barely get up in the morning and put on my shoes. So definitely want to double check what I do. We go back to the text always. And that's the approach I try to take when we look at this. We'll go back and forth between Old and New Testament as we look through Ecclesiastes and make as much application as we can. I'm also not a Hebrew or Greek scholar. And in most cases, every case that I know of, your translations were translated by actual Hebrew and Greek scholars. So trust them before you trust me. However, that being said, we're going to look up some original words in the Hebrew and Greek. I think sometimes that's interesting. I know that annoys some people, and I think sometimes that can be overdone. I remember hearing a sermon one time, a preacher, it may have been on TV or something, I don't know, but the guy was like, Jesus said he was going to build his church, and the word build here in the Greek, is whatever. It actually means to build, like you're going to build a house. It's like, well, that's neat. You've added nothing to the discussion. So build means build. Great. There's no point in mentioning that. So I'm going to try to avoid that. If the word means what it's translated as meaning, there's no point looking at the Greek to confirm it, in my opinion. However, sometimes there are times, things we can look at where it kind of opens our understanding a little bit. And I give you an example. At least for me, what's that passage where Jesus is telling Peter, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, well, yes, Lord, I love you. And feed my sheep. Do you love me? And he's like, well, yes, Lord, I love you. And he's like, well, why does Jesus keep asking Peter the same thing? He's asking, do you love me? He loves him. When you look at the Greek, Jesus is asking, do you, somebody tell me, agape, yeah. And Peter says phileo, right, in response. And so he never quite gets it. And then you get to, 2 Peter chapter 1, and Peter, again, is kind of going through add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, and blah, 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 blah. And he gets down to love, and it's agape, not phileo. It's like he finally gets it. It finally registered. Now that instance kind of annoys my younger brother. He was like, he's just skeptical of all that. How are they misunderstanding each other in that case? Agape, phileo, if they've really meant different things, then why are they having that misunderstanding? But I do think this is worth making as an illustration. Even in English, we can do that with some things, right? You don't quite get the meaning of it. If I can, say to somebody, hey man, let's go break bread later. Or like, hey, let's go break bread. I'm like, yeah, we'll grab something to eat. They can mean the same things, depending on how you use it, but they can also mean something else, and I don't even mean in the instance of like the Lord's Supper, just like we're eating a meal, but somebody really wants to invest more. I don't want to just eat at McDonald's together. I want us to actually talk and actually, commune in a different kind of way. It means something else. And it may just totally go over the other person's head. Like, yeah, man, we're going to go grab something to eat. I'm hungry, and totally miss it. And I think that's kind of what's happened with Jesus and Peter at that time. And that kind of leads to the next point. We have to be careful when we're looking at these other words, because we're not Hebrew and Greek scholars. In fact, I would say most of us in here don't speak a second language. I know Troy does. Anyone else speak a second language? You do? Oh, great. Yeah. So two people that I'm aware of in this room speak a second language. But you have to understand, it's more than just looking up a word and looking at the definition. That's what it means. There's context to things. And I want to give an illustration. Acts 20 and verse 7. We know that passage, right? On the first day of the week, the disciples came together to break bread. Has anyone ever looked that up in the Greek, out of curiosity? Like the literal translation, if you were going to look at it, the literal words of the Greek, first day of the week is actually the first Sabbath. Does that sound weird to anybody? The first Sabbath? So the first day of the week, Sabbath. Sabbath is the last day of the week. So first Sabbath. Oh, man. So if I'm looking up the Greek and I'm trying to understand this, and I don't know much about language, I'm just like, oh, man, first Sabbath. Well, we've been doing it wrong. I thought it was first day of the week. Maybe it's supposed to be the first Saturday of the month or the first one of the year. Like, oh, man, we got to be Seventh-day Adventists now or whatever. We don't know. But what you have to know and what these scholars take into account is the Romans didn't have a 7-day week. They had an 8-day cycle. So they didn't have a word for 7-day week. You know what I mean? They just didn't have a word for it. And so here are the Jews who have a 7-day week. Sabbath is like the totality of their week. So in that context, the first Sabbath means first day of the week. First day of their complete 7-day week. Romans didn't have a 7-day week, 8-day cycle. And that's what I mean. So you can, looking up a word and putting it in there and then now all of a sudden changing everything, you have to be aware of our own ignorance in language. Things are a little bit more than just changing definitions. Context means a lot. And sometimes the context is beyond the passage. It's cultural. Does that make sense? Hope I'm not making things crazy here. All right, so We're going to look up some words, try to avoid the crazy ones, and keep in mind that we have limitations. We're not language experts. I can barely speak English. All right, so now getting back to Ecclesiastes. This is a very philosophical book, and it asks like one of the most fundamental philosophical questions, what is the meaning of life? And if you want to know the answer, you can skip to chapter 12, verse 13. But we're going to get there, and I like how the book builds to it. It first starts with a perspective without God. And then, of course, we see a perspective with God, and it makes a difference. And the primary goal, at least for me in this class, is like what personal application can we get from it? And there's a lot if we look for it. And that's why I say it's like Mary Poppins' carpet bag. As many times as you reach into it, there's going to be more stuff that comes out. It holds way more than what it looks like. If you dive in there, you're always going to pull something out if you're looking. Everybody knows who Mary Poppins is, right? This is way too small. Sorry, again, I'll fix this. It's all right. It's just nothing. Don't ignore that. It's just the first chapter. But let's go back to it. So that goes back to the first 3 verses, right? Ecclesiastes. All right, so now that we're set up, we're going to dive into Ecclesiastes here. Look at those first 3 verses again and then move on. Now, I'll say, too, I want to be courteous of anybody who's watching the class online. I'm the only one with a microphone. I'll try to repeat whatever questions or comments somebody makes the best I can. But if you have questions or comments, please contribute. A lot of times I think the discussion, the different views other people have really contribute a lot, and they help other people who listen, in my opinion. So I don't want to discourage that either. Again, my primary concern here is to grow in knowledge and understanding. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that here. So, the preacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath the man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? So he's like, man, everything is just pointless. Everything's pointless. Everything's a waste. Everything's so fleeting and short and hollow. What is there any profit? Is there any benefit to living life here on earth? What a very bleak way to begin this book. I love it. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I mean, starting out, I've always liked the opener. There's not much to add there. It's terrible. Life is awful. And that's kind of what Solomon's getting at. Let's look here at verse 4. So one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also arises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where he rose. The wind goes toward the south and turns again to the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from which the rivers come, thither they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. And here, I feel like Solomon's kind of, and we don't want to pull these verses out of context and forget what preceded them, right? I mean, that sets up. So Solomon, first 3 verses, is kind of like, man, things are just awful, like there's no point to anything, everything's worthless, and look at the earth, man, everything just goes in a circle, nothing's changing, you can't do anything with it. It's just this hamster wheel of life and existence. No matter what I do, the sun's going to come up in the morning, it's going to go down at night, the wind's going to blow around in circles, we're going to get a hurricane this year somewhere, there's no avoiding it. And again, it's this kind of bleak outlook that is setting us up to go further. Now, there are some more things we can pull out of here, and we might do that in a moment. I'm not above taking tangents and chasing rabbits, and we're probably going to do that some. We got a lot going on in the world today that affects us, that affects us spiritually in the external world, right? So, and I'm going to say political things, but everything's politicized, and I don't mean Republican versus Democrat or anything like that. I just, abortion's a political issue, but it's also a moral one, right? So it's like transgenderism, another political issue that it also has moral implications. there are some more difficult issues that I probably want to touch on a little bit too when we get a chance. I'm going to say climate change. That's so loaded when I say that, because I don't want to scare anybody off when I say that. I have a very, I think, moderate view of it, and so I'm not going to touch on one way or the other. Like, you have to see it this way, and these people are crazy. I'm not going to do that. But there's also kind of, since I mentioned, I may as well touch on it a little bit. You have some people who are afraid. You have extremes, like climate change, right? Like mankind is going to burn the world down. And then you have other people like, there is zero you can do, there's nothing you can do, no point in trying to do anything. And I think the truth is really somewhere in there, somewhere. The cycles, the seasons, I don't think it's a stretch to say that's kind of what this is saying. And you can go a little further in the text, and we will, so we'll probably touch on it a little bit more as we go. We don't have to be afraid that mankind is going to destroy the world. God's going to do that. We're going to have the earth. That being said, you can poison your water, and nobody wants to drink poisoned water. That's not good. You have the American Dust Bowl where you do your agricultural stuff wrong, and it leads to too much erosion, and then these horrible kind of wind dust events that lead to famine. So we can have an effect on our environment in some ways. What's the answer? I don't know that. I'm just saying we should be good stewards of the things God has given us. So this earth, let's be clean. Let's not poison our water, obviously. But also let's not be afraid that we're somehow going to burn the world down. Yes, sir.
I know, Josh, this book is extremely deep.
Yes.
If you've never read the Bible and you read it the first time, you'd walk away depressed until you get to the end of the book.
That's right.
And there's the answer.
That's right.
So there's so many factors in this life that we have no control of. None at all.
Yeah, excellent. Yes.
So to live in this world, and the best philosophy is to fear God and keep His commandments. And we know we're going to die, just like the dog.
That's right.
Okay. Except His goes to earth and we go up. So there's a lot of comfort at the end of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of the previous slides talked about a perspective with God, perspective without God. And it's interesting too. These verses 4 through 7 talking about the cycles of the earth. You can view that positively or negatively. You can feel like that's depressing, like this just hamster wheel kind of what's the point, no big deal. Or you can view it positively, and that's when, like you say, this is a very deep book, and I feel like that's kind of almost in every page, that's kind of what it's leading toward. And you get to the end of the book, and he just throws it right there at you. Fear God, keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. That's the meaning of life. Right there. And if you do that, then all of a sudden this stuff, I'm going to die, but that doesn't mean things are terrible and bleak. I'm going to die. I'm going to meet God. I'm going to be judged by God, and that's going to be it. And now, what was it, that movie, Gladiator, Maximus Decimus Meridius said, what we do in this life echoes in eternity. I think that's true. What we do here will go on beyond us, and that's where ultimately our purpose is. I totally agree, Mike.
Josh started adding what Mike said. If you look at what we've already read in here, it's sort of like what James says, our life appears as a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing happening today that hasn't happened since the beginning of time.
Yes. Right.
Through immorality or whatever, it's been going on since the beginning of time.
I totally agree. In fact, coming down, that's what he says there in verse 9. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, that which is before us. And you have like some naysayers, people who are looking at this, I think, very surface level, like, man, they didn't have an iPhone 50 years ago. That's new. Well, that's not what he's talking about. Let's look at the context, and it's kind of going up first, kind of about these natural earthly cycles, but then exactly too about sin, temptation, like all these things that really plague man aren't new. They may manifest in different forms sometimes, but it's the same stuff. Yes, sir.
Names who labeled it.
Yeah.
Okay, so people have been murdering people since the beginning of time.
For sure.
Whether they use rock, stones, poison, knives, guns,
That's right.
So you can't do anything about that.
No. Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, and this is another tangent, sorry, but, you poor people, we have homeless people, in Pensacola and stuff like that, you see them all over, and sometimes I've heard people like, well, you always have the poor, but it's almost an excuse not to help anyone. I'm like, well, that's not the answer either, right? It's like I've got dirty dishes all the time. No matter how much I do them, I still got more dirty dishes. That's not an excuse to stop doing dishes. You know what I mean? Like, it just gets overwhelming. So we do what we can, but there's always going to be more dirty dishes. And no matter what you do to stop murder, there's always going to be some murderers, unfortunately. And whatever crime, sin you want to talk about, hopefully we can reduce them some, but to fully omit them out of the world isn't going to happen. That's not what this world's for. This our lives here are leading to the next one, which is what Solomon gets to in a bit. Sir?
One point you made here, what if, let me ask you a question, when you read Ecclesiastes, what if you don't focus on the lack of God, okay? So this becomes very true.
Yes.
And his point is, for me, every time you look at the phrase under the sun in Ecclesiastes, okay, 28 times, under the sun, what it means is, I think, without God, I could draw that line through that, under the sun, without God as focus. So,
yes.
Starting with verse 3, 28 times, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
If you don't have God as your focus, this is the way life looks.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's exactly right. I mean,
I've
it's
been there.
Yeah. Well, and one of the interesting things here is he mentions God several times. Even as he's like depressed and all his loss, all his vanity, he'll talk about God several times. So this isn't an atheist even, and that's one of the things that's interesting to me. And one of the point
It never mentions Yahweh. That's never mentioned once.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's something I didn't even look at.
Yeah, only God in the general sense of God.
Ah, interesting. That is interesting. I didn't.
Interesting points in this book that you just need to.
Yeah.
But
Well,
under the sun, I would underline under the sun every time.
no, I agree. Yeah.
It's from the point of view of a man without God.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Without the God.
Agreed.
Yahweh.
For sure. And the fact that he mentions God or a God or any type of like deity in a sense is also an interesting point, because this isn't like an atheist. So it almost reminds me of there in Matthew 7 when it's like, Lord, on that day, aren't there going to be many who say, unto me, didn't I cast out demons in your name? Didn't I do all these wonderful works in your name? And Jesus says, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never knew you. Was the Lord really our focus? Was God really our focus? And we're going to get to, especially here in the next chapter, like a lot of things Solomon pursued that weren't like, he pursues like some bad stuff. We're going to get to that in this chapter even, but there's some he gets to is like, man, I was productive, man. I built stuff and I tried to gain wisdom, and well, that's good. Be productive. You work hard. You gain knowledge. Real understanding. Well, that's good. It can be good, but he was still lost. He was still lost when he was doing that, because his focus was on just these material, tangible things that are ultimately going to corrode and fade away. And then like Mike said, like Solomon says, and then you're going to die. And then what good is it? All the stuff you built up, you're going to leave it to somebody else who didn't work for it or earn it, who's not really going to appreciate it. And then what are they going to do with it? I spent my whole life building something that someone's going to, yeah, it's awful.
That would be terrible to worry about that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Well, and maybe there's some foreshadowing here. I mean, Rehoboam was a son who came up after him and, didn't do so well. He kind of started ruining things right from the start. So it happens. Don't put all your eggs in the basket of earth, man. It's just going to fall apart, You're going to lose everything that way.
People every day worry about their money and their wealth after they're gone, and they try to tie it in so many knots that they control it after they're gone. Can you imagine?
No, yeah. It's you've got one life to live. You need to do it right, because it's going to end and a new one begins if you've done it right. This won't be the end. But Solomon here is stuck in it. And this happens, and that's why I like pointing out that he even mentions God, because faithful people can fall into this pit too. We can get wrapped up in our work. We can get wrapped up in the only thing, the things we want to achieve. And it's not wrong to work. It's not wrong to want achievements, but it's wrong to put them above God. It's wrong for that to become your focus and away from God. And I think when you do that, you do start running into problems. It's almost like we have a God-shaped hole in our existence, and if we leave that out, something's always going to feel like it's missing. Let's continue here. Verse 11, there is no remembrance of the former things, neither shall be there any remembrance of the things that are to come with those that shall come after. And not only are you going to die, you're going to be forgotten, and the things you've done are going to be forgotten. We can look at Joseph. He saved Egypt and the world in his time, and there became a Pharaoh not too long after who totally forgot about him. So we have that to look forward to too. No big deal. We have a limited time here, and it's going to end soon. And in verse 12, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I gave my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. This verse 13 is very interesting to me for two main reasons. Instead of under the sun, he says under heaven. Now, I think they really mean the same thing. And somebody may disagree with me on that, and if you do, I'd like to hear it. But I view it as really just meaning the same thing. It's just a different way to say the same thing. Under heaven, it means the sky here. And if we go to, I have a passage for that. 13. It's in Deuteronomy. Hang on. Well, I had a passage for that. I think it's in like Deuteronomy chapter 1. Man, I had written it down somewhere. So, under heaven. Anyways, in the Tower of Babel story in Genesis, we're always told, they were building a tower up to heaven. Well, I don't really think they actually meant they were trying to actually get into heaven where God lived. I don't. And I don't think God was really afraid, like, they're building a tower, man. They're about to get up here to heaven with us. We better stop them. Like, I don't think that was the case either. I think it was a descriptive word for tall tower up to the sky. And there's a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 1. If I can't find it, I'll abandon it here in a minute. But I think it's chapter 1. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 28. So Israel's, going into these lands and stuff. And so verse 21 or 28, whither shall we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people is greater and taller than we. The cities are great and walled up to heaven. And moreover, we shall see the sons of the Anakims there. The cities were walled up to heaven. Like, of course, they didn't literally go up to heaven. They were just tall walls. You know what I mean? Woo, those are big walls. They weren't going to be as big as the skyscrapers we build today. You know what I mean? They're not reaching heaven yet. So we've gone to space, haven't got to heaven. So I think they're just like here in Ecclesiastes, done under heaven. I really think it means it in the same way as under the sun. And sorry if I carried that on a bit too much, but again, context a little bit, heaven, sky. That's all I think he means here. The other thing that's interesting to me here, I gave my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven, on earth. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. Sore travail, to seek and search out the wisdom concerning all things done under heaven. That's an interesting phrase. Anybody else have a thought on that? Interested in that? I mean, it kind of makes me think of, Genesis 1, where God created man and set him to have dominion over everything on earth. And then again in Genesis 11 with Noah, lets him off the ark, kind of a similar kind of thing there. You'll have kind of dominion over, primarily talking about the animals and so forth. But and we're not going to dive into it here either, but it's interesting that Solomon says, God's given this sore travail to the mans of earth to be exercised therewith. Or even at the Tower of Babel, God watched them building this. It's like, whatever man has imagined in their heart, I will not keep from them. And that's a whole other interesting kind of phrase too. What does that mean? What's the extent of it? Elon Musk is building rockets that land vertically. That's fascinating. That's interesting stuff. But I think some of it does kind of, it may not necessarily be limited to it, but I think some of that is talking about stuff like, science, your physics, your astrophysics and stuff like that, your maths and sciences and what have you to figure things out in this life. And I think that is included here. We have the ability to do it. But what's also interesting is that we go through the book, and we'll touch on more, is that there's certain things that we're never really going to completely understand or figure out. I think as deep as you look into certain things, at one point in time, they thought the cell was the smallest building block of anything, right? They thought that was the smallest thing. And they look a little deeper. Oh, no, they've got stuff in there. You got the nucleus and the this and that, and they look a little deeper, and like, okay, that's not the smallest thing here. You got atoms. That's the smallest building block. Well, then they've getting atoms. Like, well, actually, you got electrons and so forth. And I think the deeper you look, I think the more we're just going to keep trying to find. That's my guess. And I think as far out as we look in space, we're never going to find the limit. That's my opinion. But there's always going to be some things we don't fully understand, and that's part of it too. But at the same time, God has given us the ability to search out and to understand at least a lot of this stuff. That's not necessarily wrong, we benefit from science and so forth. But again, there is a perspective to these things, which Ecclesiastes gets at.
I sort of think it goes to the last verse we hadn't read yet about in getting all this wisdom and all this knowledge that we have causes us to worry and be concerned more than we should be.
Yes. Yeah.
If we didn't have this, if we were somebody who just didn't know anything and didn't want to know anything, we wouldn't worry about stuff.
Right. That's exactly right.
If you had all that wisdom and you were that smart, you'd know that your God and keep His commandments and don't worry about it.
Fair enough. Yeah. Like Mike said, you didn't hear him. If you were really so smart, you'd know well enough to fear God and keep His commandments. And I think that's true. It is a perspective, Is there a God or isn't there a God? I think you could even, I think you even talk about goodness, But if your focus is merely the physical, tangible things of this earth, and again, we'll get into this more as we go through Ecclesiastes, and especially if you tell yourself this is the only thing. So like, science, for example, is only equipped to speak on the natural, physical earth. That's a tool. It's a method for discovery of the natural physical world. And so that's all I can talk about. It's like a metal detector is designed to detect metal. It can't find wood, And you wouldn't say, well, wood doesn't exist because my metal detector can't find it. Well, that's silly. You have to use the tool correctly. Just understand the tool and manage it within those expectations, and that's what it does. And science is the same thing. Science is a method that was derived for understanding the natural physical world. So to say, well, it can't prove God. It can't speak to it. It's kind of a ridiculous, nonsensical question. It's just it doesn't speak to it. God's not a natural physical entity, so of course He's not going to find it. Science can't find goodness either. You know what I mean? But goodness is real, or love, respect. Any of these concepts that are true. Science can do it. So we have to know the limitation, but if you're only focused on the natural physical world, that's all you're going to see. If you're a hammer, all you see is a nail, and that kind of thing. We have to broaden our horizons a little bit and look a little deeper. And this is what Solomon is kind of urging us to do as he goes through it. It seems like a depressing book, but it's not really. But it is of that, I think, in a way that I feel like most people know what it's like to be sad or to be feel anxiety or to feel, have these moments where we feel like, what's the point? And that's one of the reasons this book, I think, has an appeal. And if we look at it and read it and follow it, we get to the conclusion like Solomon does, that once you put God in the equation, things begin to make more sense. I All right, that's that. We'll pick up there next Sunday and then go from there. I'll make the slides a little bit bigger. Sorry about that.